The rain came down like it had a grudge. Cora Whitfield had her collar up and her head down when the shoulder hit her. Hard, deliberate, and the world tilted. Her heels skated on wet asphalt. Someone's hands closed on her coat, not to steady her, but to strip it, peeling the wool off her shoulders in one violent yank. She spun, arms bare, breath knocked loose. A shape was already melting into the alley, her coat balled under its arm. Then the wind changed. A gust threw grit and a loose length of scaffolding chain swinging off the fire escape straight at her face. And a gloved hand, black leather, came out of nowhere and caught it flat against a palm, inches from her cheekbone. The chain shuddered and went still. She smelled cold rain and colder cologne. Behind the glove, a man she couldn't yet see said nothing at all. The rain kept falling. Rewind 11 seconds. She had been closing the coat check window for the night, counting hangers, when the back door of the Rourke Club breathed its warm smoke and bass out into the alley, and she'd stepped into it, tired, thinking about the bus. She hadn't seen the man come up behind her. Nobody ever saw them, in her experience. That was the whole point of them. Now she stood shaking in a thin blouse, one shoulder scraped, staring at the mouth of the alley where her coat had gone. The good coat, the only warm thing she owned. Rain ran down her spine in a thin, cold line, and she pressed her scarred forearm against her stomach the way she always did when she was frightened. An old habit from a night she didn't talk about. A door opened behind her, unhurried. The man who came out did not run to her, did not shout. He walked. He was tall and unbothered by the weather. A long charcoal coat buttoned to the throat, and the men flanking the doorway stepped back for him like water parting. She knew the face by now, even if she'd never been spoken to by it. Everyone who worked the club knew Damien Rourke, and everyone knew you did not touch him, did not brush his sleeve passing in a hall, did not, God forbid, lay a hand on that coat. He stopped in front of her. His eyes went to her bare shoulders, to the goosebumps, to the scraped skin. Something moved behind them and was gone. He unbuttoned his coat. She heard one of the men by the door make a small sound, surprise or alarm. She couldn't tell. And it was only later she understood what it meant, that he was doing something they had never once seen him do. He shrugged the coat off his own shoulders, heavy warm wool that had been against him a second ago, and he draped it over her, settled it. His hands lingered at her collarbone a half-second longer than a stranger's should, adjusting the lapel so it closed over her chest, and the whole of her disappeared into it, warm, smelling of him. "Don't thank me," he said before she could. His gaze dropped, not to her face, to her hands. Her right fist was clenched at her sternum, knuckles white, and something bright showed between her fingers. A curve of silver, catching the alley's one working light. She didn't even know she was holding it. She'd grabbed it. Some scrabbling animal instinct, when the coat was ripped away. Her fingers had closed on whatever fell out of the lining, and now it was in her fist. Cold and heavy and wrong, and she couldn't make herself open her hand. Rourke saw it. For a moment he did not move at all. The rain drummed on the wool, over her shoulders. His jaw set, a muscle ticking once beneath the skin. And when he looked up from her fist to her eyes, his voice had gone very quiet and very level, the voice men used right before they did something that could not be taken back. "Tell me who took yours," he said. "Not are you all right, not what is that, just that. Who took your coat?" As if it were the only question in the world, as if it opened onto some other question underneath it that he wasn't asking yet. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. She was cold and rattled, and a stranger had put his coat on her. And she did not understand why any of this had the weight it had, why the two men at the door were watching her closed fist like it might be a live thing. There are things you learn on a night shift that you never write down. Cora had never traded a word with Damien Rourke, but she'd checked 1,000 coats, and she'd learned faces do the talking, who came in already afraid, who came in owning the room, who kept glancing at the exits. It was a small, useless talent she'd sharpened alone in a coat room, and it told her nothing now, except that this man had gone somewhere behind his eyes and hadn't come back yet. What she didn't know, what none of them said out loud, was this. Damien Rourke had not let a soul touch his coat in 3 years, not since his brother went into the ground with questions still open over how he got there and who did it. The club was his ground. Every strange face in the alley was a threat until proven otherwise. He gave nothing of himself away, least of all warmth. He had just given it to her. Far back in the alley, past the dumpsters, a whistle threaded out of the dark, low, patterned, 2 notes, and a fall, not the sound of a man calling a cab. It cut off. Rourke's head turned a half-inch toward it. Just that. His eyes narrowed on the black between the buildings. A wide man in a wet suit came off the wall by the door and crossed to him, close, speaking low. Cora only caught the shape of it. Ellis, someone had called him once. He murmured 3-4 words at Rourke's ear and stepped back into position. "Ash's people," Rourke said, not to her, flat, sniffing again. The name meant nothing to her. It clearly meant everything to him. His attention came back to her, to the fist she still hadn't opened, and he held out one gloved hand, palm up, patient, not asking. Cora looked down at her own fingers, at the wet silver edge of the thing pressing into her skin. She still didn't understand what she was holding, or why the whole night had bent itself around it. She just knew she didn't want to let go. He didn't take it from her. He waited, and when she still didn't open her hand, he let his own drop. "Inside," he said. "You'll catch your death out here." They went in through the back, past the smoke and the base, down a service corridor that smelled of bleach and old cigarettes. Ellis went ahead, one of the other men behind. Cora walked in the center of them, wrapped in a coat that dragged near the floor. And she understood, dimly, that she was being kept. Whether as a guest or as his evidence, she couldn't have said. Rourke stopped at the rear door and crouched. He didn't touch anything. He just looked, the way she looked at faces, taking the whole of it in at once. "Wet prints," he said. Came in off the alley, went back out the same way. Deep on the toe. He was carrying weight. He tilted his head. "The camera over this door." "Dead since Tuesday," Ellis said. "Waiting on the part." "Convenient," Rourke said, and let it sit there a moment, unhurried before he stood. He filed it away somewhere behind his eyes and moved on, and Cora felt the small, cold spike of it. Tuesday, waiting on the part, land and settle without anyone saying the word aloud. Then he stopped again. On the doorframe, at hand height, a smear. Dark, half-dried, tacky, where the rain hadn't reached. "That's not hers," he said. She wasn't cut. Ellis leaned in, touched a gloved finger to it, rubbed it between finger and thumb. Still soft, fresh. He glanced at Cora, then away. "Not yours, miss. Yours is scraped, not open." He looked back at Rourke. Somebody else bled on this door tonight. So the man who took her coat had left blood behind. That wasn't his victim's. Cora turned that over and got nowhere with it. Rourke got somewhere she could see it, but he didn't say where. They put her in a back office with a radiator that ticked. Warm at last, she stopped shaking, and that was almost worse. The shaking had given her something to do. The door opened without a knock. 3 men came in with Rourke, and one of them, a bull-necked man she'd seen bouncing the front, started in before the door was shut. "Boss, respectfully, we don't know this girl. She could be theirs." Plant walks out with a coat full of. "She's under my coat," Rourke said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You touch her, you're touching me. Anyone in this room unclear on that?" The bull-necked man shut his mouth. The radiator ticked. Nobody was unclear. Rourke pulled a chair around and sat across from her, elbows on his knees. For a moment, he was just a tired man in shirt sleeves. And she remembered he'd given his coat away and had nothing over his own shoulders now. "The whistle in the alley," he said to Ellis, not to her. 2 notes and a drop. "Same as the Harlow job," Ellis said. "It's a call sign. Ash's people use it to mark a lift before they pull it. So the coat wasn't random." Rourke's eyes came to her then, cool and considering. "Someone marked you before they took it, which means someone wanted what was in it." He paused, let it breathe. "Or wanted you to be the one carrying it out my door." Cora's grip tightened on the silver in her fist. They didn't stay in the office. A knock, a word from the hall, and then everything moved fast. Ellis at the door, with his hand inside his jacket, Rourke on his feet. Out in the corridor, a man Cora didn't know had come too far in past the front, hands loose at his sides. Wrong. She didn't even see Rourke decide. His arm swept back and pinned her to the wall behind him. His own body between her and the length of the hall, one palm flat against the plaster beside her head, and she was looking at the seams of his shirt across his shoulders, while somewhere past him, voices went low and hard, and then the stranger was walking back the way he'd come. Slow, watched out by 2 of Rourke's men. When it was over, Rourke didn't step away at once. His arm stayed a beat longer than it had to. Then he turned, and his gaze fell on her forearm, where the sleeve of his coat had ridden up. The old scar, pale and puckered, running from wrist toward elbow. Something in his face shifted, some hard thing easing a fraction. He reached out and drew the wool back down over it. Gentle, 2 fingers at the cuff. "Who did that?" he said. Quiet now, not the boss's voice. "A man with a knife," she said. 18 months ago. He wanted my bag. I wouldn't let go of it." A short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "I never learn." He looked at her a moment and didn't fill the silence. And somehow that was kinder than anything he could have said. The moment closed. He straightened, and the cold came back into him, like a tide returning. Out in the hall, Ellis had his phone half out of his pocket, thumb moving, angled away from the others. Cora saw it because she saw things. A message sent, quick, then the phone gone, then Ellis's face, perfectly smooth as he stepped back into the office, as if he'd only checked the time. She filed it the way Rourke filed the smear on the door. She said nothing. She wasn't sure yet whom there'd be to say it to. "There's someone here for you, mister." Rourke, a man said from the door. "The new partner. Says you're expecting him." Rourke's jaw set. "I'm not. He says the arrangement was. I know what he says." The man who came in did not knock either, but he smiled as though he had. Silver at the temples, an expensive grey suit, a watch that cost more than the club made in a night. He moved like a man walking through a house he'd already decided to buy. "Damien," he said warmly. "Terrible weather for business." Ash. Rourke didn't offer a hand. Nathaniel Ash's gaze traveled the room the way taxmen look at furniture, and landed, briefly, on Cora, on the coat swallowing her, on her white-knuckled fist, and moved off again as if she were part of the decor. But Cora had already seen the thing that stopped her breath. At his cuff, catching the office light, a silver cufflink, a wolf's head, the set of the jaw, the swept-back ear, the two small stones for eyes. She knew it because she had its brother in her hand. She didn't dare look down. She didn't dare open her fingers, but she felt the shape of the thing against her palm as if it had grown warm, and she understood nothing except that it belonged to a world she'd fallen into sideways, and that the man smiling at Damien Rourke wore its match on his sleeve, as though he had every right to it. Rourke hadn't seen her hand. Not yet. Ash was still smiling. She knew that wolf's head. Not from tonight. From 18 months ago, from the alley behind a different door, in a different rain, when a man in a grey suit had stood over another man, bleeding out on the concrete, and a cufflink had glinted at his cuff as he wiped his hands. Cora had been 3 feet away, pinned behind a dumpster with a knife wound opening down her arm, too frightened to breathe. And she had seen his face. She had seen everything. The bag they'd said was a robbery had never been a robbery. The man dying on the ground had been young, well-dressed, and had said a name with his last breath, and the name had been Damien. She was the witness, the only one who'd walked away, and she'd spent 18 months telling herself she'd imagined the wolf. The coat wasn't random after all. They hadn't wanted the wool. They'd wanted her. Had marked the coat check girl who'd surfaced at a Rourke club, terrified she'd finally talk, and when the grab went wrong in the rain, they'd settled for taking whatever she carried and getting a look at her face to be sure. To be sure it was the one who got away. And in her fist all this time was the dead man's cufflink, Damien's brother's. Its twin sat on Ash's sleeve. She looked up. Ash was watching her now, and the smile was still there. But it had gone flat behind the eyes, and she understood he had just recognized her too. "Damien," Ash said pleasantly, not looking away from her. "Your coat check girl. Where did you find her?" "She found me." Rourke's voice had changed. He'd caught the shift in the room, the way animals catch weather. Curious, Ash straightened his cuff. "I'd like a word with her, in private. New partners should meet the staff." "No," Rourke said. Then everything came apart at once. A phone buzzed. Ellis's, and Rourke moved faster than a man that still should. Plucked it from the man's hand before Ellis could close his fist. He read the screen once. "She's in the office. Send them up. He hasn't made you." Rourke looked at Ellis for one long second, and something in his face closed forever. "You," he said quietly. Ellis went for his gun. Rourke was already turning, and the shot was flat and enormous in the small room, and Ellis folded against the door he'd been opening for men who were already coming through it. 2 of Ash's people in the corridor. Rourke put himself in the doorway and fired twice more, clean, unhurried, driving them back, and shouted one word, "Cora, run," and she ran. She went the only way left, deeper, down the service stair into the cold. The kitchen cold room. Steel door, steel walls, meat hooks and white breath, and no other exit, and she understood her mistake the instant the door swung shut behind her, because she heard on the far side of it boots, slow, certain, and then a scrape, metal on metal, and a smell she knew from the docks. Someone had brought a torch. They weren't going to open the door. They were going to seal it. Cora backed into the corner where the frost bit through Damien's coat, and she thought, with a strange calm, that she had spent 18 months running from one cold room into another. She could hear the hiss of the flame, starting on the hinge. Then the boots on the far side changed. One man, then no man. A grunt, a body against the wall, and the torch cut off. The door dragged open on a screech. Rourke stood in it, with blood, not his own, across his knuckles and his shirt, half torn, and for the first time all night he looked at her like she was the only thing in the building that mattered. She crossed the room and opened her hand. The cufflink lay on her palm, the wolf's eyes catching the cold light, the old rust-brown stain worn into the engraving. Rourke went very still. She watched him recognize it, watched 18 months of not knowing hit a man all at once. That was Aiden's, he said. His voice cracked on the name. He was wearing it the night he couldn't finish. "I know," Cora said. "I was there. I saw who did it." She closed his fingers around it with both her hands, the way he'd closed the coat over her. "It was the man upstairs, Damien. The one on your sleeve. He has the pair." Above them, through the vents, Ash's voice carried, calm and expansive, addressing a room full of Rourke's own men. "Effective tonight, this house is under new management. Mr. Rourke has had a difficult evening. I'm sure you'll all be reasonable." Rourke's hand closed hard around his brother's wolf. "We have to move," he said, "before he owns the door we came in by." They didn't make it to the door. Ash's men were already on the stairs, and the only way that wasn't a barrel was up the last flight, through a fire door, out onto the roof where the rain had thinned to needles, and the city burned cold beneath them. No further to go. Cora's back hit the low parapet. Behind it was a 40-foot drop, and the wet mouth of the alley where all of this had started. Ash came through the fire door, last, unhurried, brushing water from his sleeve. 2 men flanked him, guns level. One was trained on Cora's chest. "You've made this needlessly dramatic," Ash said. He held out one grey-gloved hand. "The cufflink, Miss Whitfield, and whatever's in your head with it. I've spent 18 months being patient with loose ends. I find I've run out." Damien had put himself half in front of her without seeming to move. "You touch her," he said, "and I promise you don't leave this roof. You're outnumbered, Damien. Sentiment's expensive tonight." Ash's smile didn't waver. "The wolf, now. Or she goes over the wall, and it's a robbery gone wrong." Again, it worked so well the first time. There it was, the confession, spoken to a rooftop, and Cora felt the shape of the trap in it. He wanted the cufflink destroyed. It was the only thing on earth that put the wolf on his sleeve. At Aiden Rourke's murder, her life on one side of the scale. On the other, the single proof that could bury the man who'd cut her open in an alley and left a brother to bleed. She stopped shaking. She'd spent 18 months learning that men like this watch your eyes and never your hands. "Fine," she said, and her voice came out steady enough to surprise her. She lifted the cufflink high, catching the light so all of them looked at it, then flung it. Hard. Not at Ash, but out over the parapet into the dark. No, Ash lunged for the wall. The gunman lunged with him, instinct dragging the barrel off her chest for half a heartbeat. And that was all Damien had ever needed. He crossed the gap and took the man's wrist and turned it up. And the gun went off into the sky. Then his elbow came around, and the man dropped and didn't get up. The second gunman swung toward the sound, and Damien was already inside his reach, close, brutal, unhurried even now, and the second man folded against the fire door with the wet crack of a head meeting steel. That left Ash, one hand still hooked over the parapet, staring down 40 feet into black where his evidence had vanished, and Cora 3 steps away, opening her fist to show him what still lay flat and gleaming in her palm. She'd thrown a coat button, a brass disc off Damien's own cuff, palmed in the cold room and kept warm in her fist all this way up. The wolf's head had never left her hand. Ash understood a half-second before Damien's fingers closed in his collar and slammed him back against the wall he'd been reaching over. The grey suit crumpled. Up close, without the smile, he was just a man who'd killed someone's brother and gotten used to living with it. "That's Aiden's," Damien said, very low, and pressed the muzzle of the fallen man's gun up under Ash's jaw. "You wore his blood to my table. You shook my hand." "Damien," Ash's calm had a crack in it now. "Think. My people own the floor below us. Your people work for whoever holds the room, and I'm the one holding it." Damien didn't blink. "You're going to walk down those stairs, and you're going to tell them the arrangement's off. And then you're going to give a very long statement to some people who've been waiting 18 months to hear your voice." He leaned in. "You don't get the wall. My brother didn't get the wall." Below, boots on the stair had gone quiet. The men down there could hear their new management being marched to the door by the old. Cora let out a breath she'd been holding since the alley. Damien took Ash's collar in one hand and passed him off to no one. There was no one. There was only the 2 of them, and the rain, and the men on the ground. And for a moment he simply held the villain still and looked back over his shoulder at her, checking, the way you check a thing you can't afford to lose. Then he crossed to her and pulled her in, one arm hard around her back, the coat closing over them both, and she felt his heart going fast under all that ice. "You're done running," he said against her hair. "Not an order, a vow. Nobody takes anything from you again. Not the coat, not this." His hand found her closed fist and pressed the wolf between their palms. "Not you." By dawn the rain had stopped. The people who came for Nathaniel Ash weren't Rorks. They wore plain suits and carried warrants. And they took the recording Cora had never known. The cold room's old intercom was still capturing, and they took her statement, 18 months late and steady all the way through. They took the cufflink into an envelope marked evidence, and they promised, in the careful language of people who keep promises, that it would come back to him when it had done its work. Ash went out in handcuffs, not a box. That mattered to Damien more than she'd expected. "I want him to have years to think about it," he said. A week later, the cufflink came home. Damien cleaned the old stain from the silver himself, slowly, at the kitchen table, and then he fixed it to his own cuff where his brothers had been meant to sit, and the wolf caught the morning light and looked, for once, like something other than a wound. Then he stood and lifted the charcoal coat from the back of her chair and settled it over her shoulders the way he had in the alley. Except this time, his hands stayed, smoothing the collar, unhurried. It was never alone, he said. She let herself lean back into him. For the first time in 18 months, no part of her was listening for boots. They walked her out to the car together. As it pulled from the curb, Ash turned his head in the back seat of the Federal sedan and found her through the glass. He wasn't afraid. He smiled, small and cold, and mouthed something she read as clearly as if he'd said it against her ear. There were 4 of us. The sedan carried him off into the grey. Cora stood very still on the wet pavement, Damien's arm around her, and told herself it was over. Across the street, a car she didn't recognize sat dark at the curb. As she watched, its headlights flickered, once, twice, a pause, once more. 2 flashes and a drop. The old call sign, the one from the alley. Damien's hand tightened on her shoulder. Neither of them moved. If you want to know which of Nathaniel Ash's brothers just parked outside the Rourke Club, and what he came for, stay with the channel. This story isn't finished, not even close.